An increasing number of individuals and families are living in recreational vehicles to avoid being homeless. We address this issue on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. More and more people are now living in recreational vehicles on a daily basis as a permanent housing arrangement. This is especially evident in the Bay Area. Several cities are enacting laws to deal with some of the challenges that RV dwelling is causing in their communities. On this edition of Talking with Henrietta, I'll talk with two guests who are very involved with homelessness and those who are living in RVs. Seated to my left is Pastor Paul Bains, who is the senior pastor at St. Samuel Church of God in Christ, which is located in East Palo Alto. In 1999, Pastor Bains co-founded the nonprofit organization Project We Hope to serve those who are homeless. Michelle Dare is seated to my right. Michelle is a management analyst for the city of East Palo Alto. She specializes in the city's environmental program, which includes water and solid waste-related compliance requirements to keep the water and environment clean and healthy for the community. She has worked in East Palo Alto since August 2011. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you with me. Now, I had mentioned just now that you co-founded Project We Hope in 1999, and you later founded a homeless shelter in 2009?
Yes. We started off in 2004 with a House of Hope, which was for men only. And then in 2009, or actually 2008, along with a group of leaders within the East Palo Alto community, we looked at we need to address this issue because East Palo Alto at that particular time had the highest amount of homelessness in the whole county of San Mateo per capita. And so we needed to do something to meet an unmet need. And we came together, and the county partnered with us and the city of East Palo Alto partnered with us.
So in that time, what would you say about the increase? Has homelessness been increasing?
If you want to look at homelessness from people being out on the street, no. Actually, from that time, from 2009, homelessness has actually declined in the city of East Palo Alto and actually in the whole county of San Mateo, but has increased in the county of Santa Clara. However, the RV and car dwellings has increased because people are not going so much out on the street only. They're going into vehicles that were not made for habitation. When they're sleeping in cars, when they're sleeping in vans, they weren't made for that. RVs, yes, but not to live out of an RV.
Okay, now, Michelle, since 2011, when you started working in East Palo Alto, what observations would you make in terms of homelessness?
Well, I think that we've heard a great deal from our school district about homeless students. Our superintendent has cited that about 44% of the kids are homeless, and she's expanded the term of homeless to include kids that are in more dense settings of housing. So we have seen that in the city.
What do you mean more dense settings of housing?
So we have single family homes that were traditionally put to use by a single family are being used for multiple families, and so the density of the housing is being used for more than what it was originally designed for. We had a large number of people that were living in isolated areas in the city, and as developers are cleaning up their properties that were formerly isolated, we're having people displaced because you know, there were a few people living out there in isolated areas. And now that they're displaced from those isolated areas, they're more present and more we're more aware of their presence because they're impacting the community more directly.
Sure. Now, Pastor Bains, I was just now surprised to hear you say that homelessness is decreasing in East Palo Alto in the county of San Mateo, while increasing in Santa Clara County. When you first founded the shelter for men in 2004, when we thought of homelessness, we thought of men primarily, right? Was
Correct.
that why that was for men?
Yes, because it was also to help reduce the recidivism that caused, particularly as it pertains to people of color, which have high incarceration rates in the prison system. It doesn't make sense to me that, you know, we have 6%, particularly African Americans or blacks, make up 6% of the population in the United States, but they make up 49% of the prison population. So that, coupled with homelessness, was the target, what we did with the House of Hope. But we can only house up to about 12 men. And we wanted to be able to increase our impact in our, particularly the city of East Palo Alto, but also the region. And so we approached the county, and the county said, you know, let's see, we heard what you were doing. We had volunteers starting off, just coming in, and we did it during inclement weather times. Started off with a few volunteers, and then from there we grew out to where the city and the county recognized our efforts and then came and partnered with us. And then in 2012, we got a sizable grant from the county, which allowed us to be a year-round shelter.
But you started out with men, and the situation now includes homeless families, or did it include homeless families then?
At that time, we didn't include homeless families, even though we served both men and women, but they were adults. For the families, the county had a system where we could get them into a hotel system because County San Mateo did not believe for a single parent with kids under the age of 7 to be out on the street. And so there's the hotel voucher program that was implemented by the County of San Mateo.
That still exists.
It still exists to this day.
But at the same time, we do have homeless families, do we?
Yes.
Out on the streets.
Yes, we do. And so in order to actually deal directly with them, it's also our partnership that we have with El Concilio, with Life Moves, with Abode Services, and Spring Street, Maple Street, as well as Samaritan House. And so I like to say none of us is as strong as all of us. And so it takes many different organizations to touch the person that is homeless or that family that is homeless, because there's different needs for different families, and we cannot do it all ourselves. And so.
Sure. So when did this whole idea of recreational vehicles, families living in recreational vehicles, do you know when that started?
I'm going to start with a guess that we didn't have this problem substantial. Maybe there were a couple of people living in RVs throughout the years, and I've witnessed them on local roadways over the years, maybe 1 or 2 RVs within the city limits. In the last year alone, we've seen dozens and dozens of RVs being used as an opportunity for housing, and we've seen families, individuals, all spectrum of people living in them.
Well, we have a picture right now that we can see of RVs lining the streets. One of the streets in East Palo Alto, that's the photo. And it was Week Street that dead ends into the bay, and there were RVs lined on both sides of that particular street, and that was about November 2017. Is that, when we talk about RVs on the streets, is that type of concentration what we're talking about? We can end the slide now, or the photo.
So yeah, that's about the density that we're seeing on the roadways presently. Not on all the roads. There's a favoritism for certain roads, particularly roads where we don't have street sweeping enforcement, where people can continuously stay in one spot, because when they set up their RV, there's a lot of times they have to set it up physically. They have to put structures down to support it, to keep it stable from moving around when they're in it. And so they prefer not to have to do that multiple times. And so they're moving onto roadways where it's not necessary to take down their system on a daily basis.
Do you think that the rise in RVs might coincide with people being evicted from apartments for not being able to pay the rent?
And I chuckle because, yes, I mean, there are the financial pressures, and this is across the United States, but particularly here in the Valley, where in Santa Clara County and San Mateo County, you have over 75,000 millionaires and billionaires, and bless them. However, because of the richness and the demand for housing, houses that once used to be a couple $100,000 in East Palo Alto are now going for $700,000. And the latest thing is that in East Palo Alto alone, in the last 10 months, it increased 15%, the value of the house. And so people are being priced out. It's been, I call it gentrification on steroids. And to me, the root cause or the root solution to that would be to create Eli housing, extremely low income housing. Yes, I love our shelter. I love the other shelters. But if we don't create extremely low income housing for the working poor and for the homeless, this problem will continue to be a significant problem in the Valley.
No, you can't have gentrification when people own homes unless they are selling their homes or they're moving out, right?
Well, if they can't afford to buy the home, if they've been renting and they get pushed out because of the pricing, because the landlord says, well, I'm going to increase the rent by 40%. That to me is a form of gentrification that happens in communities. And now East Palo Alto in the last 5 or 7 years have really seen an increase in their property values, which is a good thing in one sense, but it's also, we have to create more, I don't like to say affordable housing because affordable is relative who can afford it. And if you're not making a couple $100,000, then it's going to be hard for you to buy that home.
Sure.
Well, and I'd like to add to that, because I think that what we're seeing is obviously market speculation on the amount of money people can profit off of from renting out their homes. And they'll turn them over if they can. And in East Palo Alto, we have a low-income housing program where we have rent stabilization laws that protect the tenants. But even in those cases, if the property owner moves into the property, or there's ways around having to continuously rent to a family. And so what we're seeing is that displacement is occurring, but there's people that are price gouging in other ways. Sure. They've found another means, so they recognize how to make a profit off of a crisis. So we're having a housing crisis, and they'll go out, and I see neighbors doing this all the time. They'll go out and purchase RVs and rent them out to the community members.
Now, I was going to ask you that if the people living in the RVs own them, or if they are renting.
Well, I think Pastor Bains could speak more to this than I can, but I will tell you that the folks that I've talked to, it's a hit and a miss whether or not that's their RV.
So there is the issue, and I don't knock anyone for being or having entrepreneurial spirit. And if you're going to make a fair profit, that's good. But to have a person or persons to rent out an RV that may be costing them a couple $100 for $600 to $800 more, when they know that these families can't afford that much because they're getting kicked out of their home that they were in.
Are you saying that there are people who rent RVs just to rent them?
Yes, I'm saying
to other people.
Yes, in Mountain View and particularly East Palo Alto, we have people who are renting RVs to families. Some of them are renting it at a fair market price, and some of them are renting at an absorbently high amount. And it's not fair, and it's not right, and there needs to be something done about it.
So when you talk about, just to give viewers a picture, when you talk about an exorbitant rate and a fair rate, what are we talking about? Do you have specific figures in mind?
What I've heard. I cannot prove it. I can only go by what the families are telling me. And some have said they're paying, up to $1,000 to rent an RV for a month. And so to me, that is extremely high, particularly when you can go online, buy an RV, and if you're going to even get a loan to buy that RV, more than likely it's not going to cost you more than $200 to $300.
So if somebody's going to pay that much money to rent an RV from somebody else, why can't they just go on and rent an RV themselves?
Well, some places that they are going to rent, they may not have the proper documentation, they may not have the right credit history. There's a lot of obstacles and barriers that are out there that don't allow them to go ahead and establish their credit. Some are doing that, but some aren't. And I'm saying those that are forced in this position, they are the ones that are being taken advantage of, because they know that if I know Henrietta didn't have the amount of money or the right credit, then I can charge her more. And so that's taking advantage. That's a tragedy within a tragedy, as far as I'm concerned.
I'd add that the community is being taken advantage of too, because there's a variety of different types of RVs. There's so-called fifth wheels, which are attached to a motor vehicle that are pulled. And what's happening is people are getting these things, they're getting them off Craigslist or buying them used, and they're taking a vehicle, they're hauling them into communities, dropping them on the side of the road, and renting them out. Now, nobody who's living out of an RV or a car has solid waste service. They're not going to be able to have Recology or the solid waste service provider come and pull up to their vehicle and service their needs for solid waste. When you're in a fifth wheel, the vehicle's stationary on the road without a motor vehicle, you have no way of hauling off your additional waste, human waste. And that is being discharged directly onto the streets in many cases. And so that's where the environmental compliance issues come into place. And we have this issue with a lot of the RVs that are not operational.
So before you get into that and talking about non-operational, that I am going to ask you, when these people who are renting the RVs are being asked to move them, do they have to move them themselves? Are they then responsible for them being moved, or the people from whom they're renting?
Well, what I've heard from many different families is that the RV dweller is the RV renter is putting all the fixes, or some of the fixes, I don't want to say all, some of the fixes on the rentees. And so they're passing that cost on down to them. Some of the RVs don't have smoke detectors, carbon monoxide and extinguishers. Some of them haven't even been registered properly, or the registration has expired. And so it's not all of them. And there's some renters out there that's really doing some good work, and they're really trying to help people. But then there's a few that, and excuse my language, but you can call them poverty pimps, that are taking advantage of the people that are already disadvantaged in society. And so that's what's occurring. On a large scale, I don't think it's occurring on much as a large scale that we have RV dwellers out there, but on a scale enough that it should be changed or something should be done about it. The problem is that there's no laws in there about enforcing. And I can give you an example that came across my desk today, where a RV dweller that was taking advantage of people, actually, because they got a ticket, the rentees got a ticket, and they didn't know the ticket, they had gotten a ticket, and the RV owner took the vehicle away from the family with kids, kept all their belongings, and said they're not going to give them back the vehicle or their belongings inside the RV until they pay this $250 ticket. So that just came across my desk today. And there are other examples like that where, because there's no residence on an RV, so they don't even know if they get a ticket. A lot of times.
The ticket would go to the person who owned it.
That's correct.
Or the one who's renting it.
To the registered owner.
So there's some scenarios like that where they're being taken advantage of as well.
And when you ask about them having to move their vehicles, it's been very rare that people have been asked to move their vehicles.
Well, they were asked by the city about November of last year.
Right. And
So you said it's
yeah,
rare.
yeah.
Tell us when they were asked to move it and why they were asked to move
So
it.
if they park, if anybody parks on any public right-of-way where there's parking restrictions, where there's limited time when you can park, for instance, on days when the streets are being swept, if they don't move their vehicle, they're going to get a ticket. If the person that's able to put the ticket on their vehicle, they cannot discriminate and say not the RVs, only the single regular occupancy vehicles. So in the event that they get a ticket for parking in the public right-of-way, they're not being towed, they're not being asked to move. That's their reminder that they're supposed to move their vehicle on street sweeping days. The instances where we've asked people to move their vehicles have only been in cases of a health emergency. That's the only time we've asked people to move their
We'll
vehicles.
go back to that. A $250 ticket, what was that for? No, I think you said that the only time they get a ticket is maybe during street sweeping. So how much would that ticket be?
Usually I think it's under $40.
So $250.
The $250 was actually in another city. It wasn't in the city of East Palo Alto. And so because we get information from other cities about this problem, because we have a mobile hygiene unit that is being asked to be used at safe parking areas and where the homeless gather. And so we get information directly from the city about some of the problems, and we try to work with our case managers to figure out a solution and other service providers to address that particular issue.
Now, you finished the
Yes.
sentence. Okay. Talking about health hazards, you mentioned health hazards. What kind of health hazards are we talking about? When the city of East Palo Alto asked all of those RVs that we saw in that photo, those inhabitants,
Right.
to move their vehicles.
So I was responsible for that incident, and I'll take full credit for it, although our executive team provided very good service to the community also by supporting me.
When you said you're responsible for it,
So
what
as
do you
the
mean?
environmental compliance person, I went down the street, I walked down the street, and I used my olfactory senses and smelled that there was waste in the street. And
Actually in the street or
actually
in the
on the
sewers?
street, on the surface of the roadway. And so walking down, this started in June of 2017. I started identifying that there was a problem. The problem with the RV discharges is that if somebody discharges on the street, they can roll 10 feet and you can't identify who did it. The material will dry up. There's a variety of ways. But what we ended up finding out, and the picture that you had of Week Street with all the RVs, that's what it looked like. And so there were a variety of people parking, and there were a couple of people that would discharge, or so we thought. And I caught a couple of them, and we cited them for discharge, and we actually caught them discharging.
And what did they say?
They were denying that they did it, although there was a pipe, directly discharging into the street. And so because that's a public health hazard, you can have all these pathogens that the public is exposed to. The city has to do something to prevent that from occurring. So I continue to do regular enforcement inspections. And in addition to regular enforcement inspections, I also went in and I started educating the community. And I said, I provided them with a list of locations to discharge, offering to pay out of my pocket if they couldn't afford it, because I'm compassionate for people who are living.
How much would something like that cost?
$25 to take it and discharge it. But depending on the number of people you have living in the vehicle, you might need the service twice a week. You might need the service once a month. It depends on the usage, right? Just like at home, you don't really keep track of how many times you're flushing the toilet, most likely.
So you have to have a car, I would assume. You wouldn't drive your recreational vehicle where? To Redwood City or?
Right. So you would take your vehicle to take it and have the tank emptied. And so
Can you take the tank out of your vehicle? No, you
have
to take
drive the vehicle. And so in the cases where, so I was educating the community, they were telling me that they were properly disposing of their waste. And I said, as a voluntary compliance tool, put a receipt, tape a receipt to your windshield. So I know who's complying, and we know that then there's no problem. We don't have to have any, harassment because people were claiming that I was harassing them. I said, no, we don't. We want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. We know there's a discharge. We can smell it. It's unhealthy for the people that were living in the RVs. It's unhealthy for the residents in the community, because this is right next to the Bay Trail, where people walk with their family members and their dogs and bike and all kinds of recreational facilities. So we want to make sure that everybody in the community is safe. There was a full failure of voluntary compliance. Nobody put their receipts on their windshields. They agreed to do it, but they just didn't follow through with it. And in November, we actually saw that the storm drain, which you said discharges to the bay, it doesn't discharge to the bay. It actually has a closed pipe, and the closed pipe filled, and there was sewage up to the street level. And we knew that it was sewage because it was very obvious with the nose and with the eyes what was going on in the storm drain.
Yeah, I think what I said was that street dead ended.
Oh.
The weak street
Yeah.
dead ended.
Yeah,
right
it doesn't discharge to the bay, but yeah, and
Yes. So everybody had to move.
So before the rain event occurred, because we were getting 3 inches of rain within the next 2 days, we asked them, we need to clean the street. We need you out of this area, because now this is going to be a public health emergency if we don't have you move. So we didn't ask them to leave for good. We just said that you need to move your vehicle 200 feet off this street.
And then you can move back.
Section.
You can move back?
We didn't know what to expect. So this particular street, because it doesn't discharge to the bay, just floods. So there was no time, but you can park anywhere else but this area, because this area is going to flood. We knew that it was going to flood, and it did.
So right now, RVs are parked all over the city of East Palo Alto.
Yes, I mean, RVs have been parked in many different communities where people actually are living in them on people's property as well. And what Michelle was alluding to earlier when she was talking about the school district, we call that couch surfing, where you may have 3, possibly even 4 families living in a home. So those are real life issues that our city is facing. And, this is one of the wealthiest places on the earth. And I think we have the power. I think we have very compassionate people. And we have the resources to solve these problems. We just need to all come to the table to.
Sure. Now, in terms of everybody coming to the table, people living in RVs occurs in Palo Alto. It occurs in Mountain View. Are the problems similar? And the way they're being handled, are they similar?
So I collaborate, and so does Pastor Bains, I'm sure, with those other agencies that you just mentioned. And there are we're discussing best management strategies on how do you help people, how are you compassionate, how are you protecting the public's health, and making sure everybody is going to have a successful future together. And we've established some baseline criteria, but the city of East Palo Alto doesn't have the resources that the city of Palo Alto does, that the city of Mountain View does. They have Mountain View has a very robust inspection program. They have a very robust process of having their police go out and ensure that the folks that are living in their RVs have a community that's tidy, that's respectful of the environment of the
And they
rest
are
of the
living on
community.
the streets.
And they're living on the streets. But if you drive down their street on Cristano Street or any of the
El
streets,
Camino Real, I've seen some.
they're tidy. They're keeping their spaces clean. They're not disposing of refuse in the public right of way, and it doesn't smell.
Okay. Now, Pastor Bains, I think you told me in a conversation that we had that some of the RVs in East Palo Alto are brought from other areas.
Well, not a whole lot, but there are some. And what really is that we have the same owner that have RVs in East Palo Alto as well as Menlo Park. There's owners, even the ones in Mountain View right now. They are registered to East Palo Alto residents. And so, again, I don't mind myself that someone's being an entrepreneur when they're really trying to help someone. It's just when they are taking advantage of the situation.
Sure. Now, I think there's some city regulations, maybe in Mountain View, that some of the RV dwellers haven't met. And they have been directed to East Palo Alto. Do you read?
I don't know how true that is, to be honest with you. I know that today someone walked in my office from Redwood City, says, we heard that you are starting a safe parking initiative in East Palo Alto, and we would like to come and bring our RV there and park it there. And then yesterday someone said, I'd like to store my RV at the safe parking initiative. So I had to tell them both in a very polite and professional way. That's what this program that we're partnering with the city on is not that type of program. It's not an RV park that we're trying to establish. It's a safe parking initiative. So RV park, you would have all these amenities. You could stay there 24/7, 300, well, however long that particular RV park allows you to stay there. So it's not for you to park an RV there and you live somewhere else. It's not for you to set up camp and be there. The goal is to give you a safe place and get you connected to permanent or supportive housing so you can get back on that road to self-sufficiency. And so we don't want the debris being dropped any place throughout our city. We don't want the waste to be dumped in public areas. And so, you know, Facebook, for instance, is one of those organizations that is willing to come alongside and support this project by helping the RVs be, one, registered to whoever the owner is, also to get the carbon monoxides and get it fixed up to where it's drivable, it's operable.
Sure.
So that to me is being more solution driven as opposed to problem consumed when we're talking about a systemic issue that's facing our region, not just East Palo Alto, but the whole region.
Well,
Now,
and the other part of that parking initiative would require, unless we want to perpetually encourage people to live in RVs, it would require that we put some restrictions on where RVs are allowed to park. Right now, anywhere in the city of East Palo Alto, you can have an RV parked. And there's a very large density of RVs on certain roadways where they're less likely to have to move their vehicle. And if we don't put some constraints, then we're going to grow the number of people that require these services. And I think it's better to give them the supportive housing services instead of getting them stuck in this very undignified way of living. It's very challenging for people to live. I mean, that's one of the arguments that they're expressing, that they, you know, they want solid waste service and basic services.
I can't think of anything more undignified than being homeless, living in the streets. At least in terms of RVs, people have shelter.
Right.
As long as that RV is meeting a certain standard. You know, again, if someone is renting out an RV that, you know, needs to be small, needs the oven working, make sure the heater works in the RV, you know, those things are happening out there. You know, the windows aren't all broken. And so, you know, when people are desperate, they will take anything to, you know, particularly if they have kids, to keep their kids out of the cold air so they're not sleeping in their car. They'll take on something like that. But we don't, that's substandard living.
Yeah, and
Sure.
we wouldn't allow them to live in a house that didn't have basic amenities like running water.
But we allow people to be homeless on the streets.
I think it's less prevalent in East Palo Alto for people to be homeless on the streets. Pastor Bains has Project We Hope. A lot of the people, when I encounter them in parks, and they're referred directly to services. And most of the time they accept the services. People are not interested in living directly on the streets. And the folks that are living in the RVs are living in a status where the RVs are not self-contained, right? They have tarps, the picture that you posted earlier, they have tarps covering the RVs because they're not self-contained. They don't have a way of holding in the sewage, but they're using the facilities in the RV and dumping the sewage on the streets of the community.
So
it's
Michelle,
challenging.
the situation that you described that might exist in East Palo Alto in terms of the lack of homeless living on the street. But if you look at San Francisco, for instance, if you look at Oakland, if you look at other communities, there are just hundreds of people living on the streets.
Right, and I think that says a lot about our churches and the supportive network that East Palo Alto has been able to deliver to the community. Yeah.
So in terms of the homeless living on the streets, you've been dealing with them.
Yes, we have case managers. And again, it's not just Project We Hope. Again, it's a collaborative effort. So El Concilio plays a role, Life Moves plays a role. Again, both services play a role to address the systemic challenges that our community and our society is facing. We just happen to be one of 3 shelters in the whole county of San Mateo that is in East Palo Alto, where we've seen over 500 unique individuals every year. We feed them, but we also have programs to get them back on their feet. You know, we have classes, we have a training program, a job program, financial literacy and communications, anger management classes.
So let's dispel the myth, if it is a myth, that the people who are homeless because they want to be homeless and they want to live on the streets.
There are some, but there's very few. That's, I would say that's probably less than 1% of the homeless. People, they want to be seen, they want to be recognized, and they want to be dignified in such a way where people do see them, because a lot of times I think we've, as a society in some areas, we've become immune to the homeless. We'll walk right by them as if we don't see them. We won't look them eye to eye. We won't say, hi, how are you doing? Even if you don't, I don't believe in giving them money, homeless people. I ask them, what do you want the money for when they ask me? And then I tend to carry around gift cards, but I also carry around a card saying, here's a number you can call that will get you services, that can get you hooked up with a shelter, get you hooked up with, if you need mental health appointments. You always got to have something to give them, and money's not always the answer.
No, that sounds good, that there are those services there. You also talk about the services when you go out to talk with people living in RVs. Do people have to get on a waiting list for those services, or are they immediately available?
So I will say that, at least from my perspective, people that live in RVs don't see themselves as homeless, right? So they're less inclined to accept services because they've got a roof over your head, like you've described. It's a roof over their head, and they don't see themselves as homeless. And so when we offer them services, they're much more interested in solid waste services or sewage services or something that's going to directly benefit them continuously living in the RV. When I talk to people that are living in tents or structures in our parks, in our public right-of-way, they're more inclined to accept a variety of services.
Even though they have a roof over their head, so to speak, I would think that they would not see that as a permanent housing situation. I would think that that's rather cramped, limited.
They're so destitute that they cannot imagine themselves being able to afford rent in this area. And they're trapped because their jobs are here. And if they wanted to live anywhere else, they would have to drive an extensive, part of this is that the community has gotten so
when you say their jobs are here, that's not necessarily in East Palo Alto, but in the
region,
Bay Area.
Yeah,
right.
In this region.
And so they have cars, or?
Yeah, many of them have cars.
In addition to the RV?
In addition to the RV.
That's parked near the RV, or parked around the corner, or parked wherever they can find parking?
Wherever they can find parking, yes. Yeah, so they have most of the RV occupants that I've talked with have jobs. Most of them have jobs.
This is the working poor.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. And they would prefer to live in an apartment building. They would prefer to rent a house. However, they've just been priced out because the amount of money that they make, that would probably be like 90% of it going towards their rent to keep that roof over their head. And so in some instances, though, people have been forced out because, you know, sometimes renters will, under the guise of remodeling, will use that and then jack up that price that was once, whatever, $1,500 to $3,000. And I'm not saying that apartment buildings don't have that right, because they do have that right to do that. However, if it's someone that has been a tenant for years with you, and then you want to do this renovation, the rent should not double once you complete the renovation. I think that.
Now, they would say there is the cost of renovating, that
Well-
they may have had a loan to take out for that renovation, and they have more expenditures, or now more debt themselves, and they're passing that on.
Yes, which is what they have that right to do. Just like any business, there's a cost to do business. That's perfectly right. It's when you have someone that has been never late on their payment, who's been a good tenant, help keep the apartment building clean and things of that nature. That's when I'm like, can they get a little break on here? Increase it. We do have, because I was part of that, what EPA can do, and William Webster, when we initiated the I'm having a middle-aged moment. The 20%
Rent stabilization.
Rent stabilization. Thank you. And so in East Palo Alto, you can only go up so much. But in other communities, I've seen it, and it's pretty sad.
Sure, and it can go up to whatever the traffic will bear. I think once the client under that rent situation
Rent
moves out,
stabilization ordinance.
and then
Yeah.
it goes to market rate.
Well, and I think what we're really experiencing is the crux of having developed so much opportunity in terms of jobs without coupling that opportunity with housing, right? So we've created a tremendous number of jobs, and I forget the numbers, but it's got at least to be a 5-to-1 ratio of,
Sure.
of jobs to housing over the last decade, and we're experiencing that pressure on that market, right? Supply and
right.
demand. We don't have the supply, and so the
And
demand is
East
high.
Palo Alto doesn't have the jobs within
No.
the city
No,
itself.
but everybody's working. The unemployment rate's, 2.4% in
Yes.
East Palo Alto?
Yes.
So some cities like Oakland and San Francisco, and Oakland just this week, are providing little houses,
Sheds.
80 square feet. Would that be something for East Palo Alto? And there are also accessory dwelling units that can go in backyards. But I'm just thinking there are lots in East Palo Alto, for instance. What about these little small sheds?
So
Would they be better than the?
So we presently have second units all over the city, unpermitted second units all over
In
the
garages,
city. We
for
have
instance.
garage conversions. We have a second dwelling ordinance where the community is being assisted by staff to try to legalize anything that's habitable and anything that could possibly become habitable. We're doing that already. What we're seeing is, and when you ask about what about adding accessory dwelling units, we're doing that. What about
in backyards?
in backyards? We're doing. East Palo Alto's got to be the densest community in the Bay Area, maybe next to San Francisco, and yet we're still experiencing this because people love East Palo Alto. East Palo Alto's got action. We've got connection to all the, we're right between Facebook and Google, where we've got all the job opportunities. You can hop on a freeway and be at your job in a really short period
You mean in
of time.
terms of location?
It's
but
a-
not necessarily amenities within the city.
Well, I think that they find it a very compassionate community where people are not going to displace them.
Oh, you mean
If
for
we can.
people coming in who
Yeah.
we're a very forgiving city, and we're a very lovable city. My family's been in or around East Palo Alto since 1962. And so we've seen how this, I say that East Palo Alto is growing up. That's what I say. But at one time, and this is no knock on any other city, the city of Palo Alto's community recreation budget was larger than the whole budget of the city of East Palo Alto. And so you have the difference between the haves and the have-nots. Now with Amazon and Facebook and others coming in and new projects that are coming online, and thank God for City of Mountain View giving us the water rights, it will help us to build the economic stability that the city needs, the infrastructure, the road infrastructure, the water rights. All of that is going to help raise, and people know that, investors also know that. And so for the last 10 years, you have an influx where at one time, nobody wanted to live in East Palo Alto. I remember when I went to apply for a job, and my license said East Palo Alto, and they said, "Oh, you're in East Palo Alto? Oh no, we don't hire people from East Palo Alto." They just blatantly said that, you know, and you know, the redlining that used to go take place and things of that nature. And so, you know, it's changed. Now it's now a place where people want to come. You know, crime is down. While we had one homicide too many, we only had that one homicide. As opposed to being the murder capital of the world.
And that was not something random. That was an interfamily.
That was people who were outside of our community that moved into our community, and they were scientists. I don't know if I should say everything, but
So it seems to me when you talk about things improving in the tax base and people wanting to invest here, all of these new amenities and attractions are happening at a time when the people who traditionally have lived here are being displaced. Isn't that somewhat ironic? That all of these services, the new services, would be going to other people.
Right.
well, yes and no. I mean, when you're talking about services, you're talking about services for the homeless, or you're talking about services for the community at large?
Services for the community at large.
Yes, the houses that are being bought now are typically from people from that have not grown up in East Palo Alto or East Menlo Park. There are people, and you need to have a certain mixture of a group of people, because we believe in diversity, the rich diversity that East Palo Alto has. That's always been a stapleton of our community. It's the sadness piece that the fabric of that community is now being unwoven to the point to where people who lived there for years now can't live there anymore. They won't be able to see their kids grow up there, or their grandkids grow up there.
Well, and I want to give credit to our council, because our city council is very, they're very firm on their stance on rent stabilization.
Yes.
So as the community develops, we're not losing the rent stabilized units, because they're insisting that they're retained and expanded. They've got very strong stance on development and providing housing programs for future development. So they're really taking care of the community for the long term with that stance.
So let me just say that stance would be for the apartment dwellers, right? And
Well,
that would be maybe 1,200 people
Well, that depends on.
out of a population of maybe 30,000?
There are more than just apartments in the rent stabilization program. There are people that own multiple houses or have second units on their properties that are part of that rent stabilization program. And those are rent stabilized units, and they're not going away as far as the city council's putting in structures to make sure they're retained. So in terms of, they're doing everything that they can to offset the gentrification that's naturally occurring and imposing itself on the community. At the same time, there's all these other issues that are coming along where, people are being displaced. That's happening in real time, and they're trying to keep their kids in the same school district. So they get them in an RV, or they get them in somebody's garage, or try to do whatever they can to stabilize, and it's better for the community that they stabilize, because if East Palo Alto has this very dynamic, this is one of the reasons why the city was established in the first place, because having a flux of residents is not healthy for any community.
So when we talk about maybe 40% of the students, the children in the school district being homeless, are we talking homeless out in the streets, homeless in shelters, homeless in RVs?
I think this is Pastor Bains' topic.
And we work closely with Superintendent Gloria Hernandez, Goff, and this homeless is defined as the McKinley-Bento Act, and so you have what we call a couch service. So we have kids and families that are doubled up. There are some that are in RVs, but I would say it's less than 5%. In November, it was 1,563 kids that were defined, according to the McKinley-Bento Act, as homeless in the Ravenswood School District.
But being housed in multiple family situations.
Right. The majority of them, I would say 90% of them, were being housed that way. Some, though, were living in RVs, and some were living in cars, because we've helped some of those families get into places like the Haven House over in Menlo Park. or some other place. And then some are just moving out of the school district because they just are getting pushed out. And they're moving to Stockton, Madero, and to the Valley, and what have you.
And hopefully not commuting in.
Well,
Oh, I
it depends.
heard today how the commutes can be 2 hours.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and I think that when we have
Both ways.
Yes.
when we have
Quality
when
of
we
life.
have students or families that are living in these multiple families living in what should be a single or was traditionally a single family unit, a lot of times they're subletting, right? And so when you have folks that are subletting and they're not on the actual contract for renting that apartment or that house, that's a very precarious situation, because if the property owner finds out how dense the living situation is, everybody's out on the street. And if they're not meeting the terms of their agreement, then everybody's out on the street. So it's a very precarious situation, and that's why I think the superintendent has been so vocal about the issue and making sure that these kids get some stability.
So you're going to say something?
Yeah, because I get people calling us every week, basically, and I mean literally every week. There's someone calling about, I lost my house, I lost my place to stay. One young lady who had a studio had also 9 other people staying in that studio with her because they were family members, they were close friends, there was a pregnant woman. And so these are real life situations that people are experiencing, and yet they're students, and they're also college students, and they're also working. And so that's what's going on in life, particularly in East Palo Alto and East Menlo Park. And so we have to figure out this is a housing solution. It's not anything else, but shelters are not, they're temporary stay. I'm talking about my business. I need to go out of business, okay? All the shelters need to go out of business, but until we spend the time and the resources and invest in Eli housing and smart housing with the right transportation pathways to it, thoroughways, we're going to continually deal with this problem. So we got to really look at, and I'm glad what Mayor Niss in Palo Alto said at her state of address, that she really wants to focus on the diversity and bringing various levels of affordable housing, is what she said, into the city of Palo Alto, where, you know, it's a very affluent city. It's one of the most affluent cities in the United States. Great amenities, great city to live in.
And a lot of people who want it to stay that way and think that bringing in some changes would destroy what they currently
Some
have.
people don't believe in diversity.
There is that resistance.
There is that resistance. There is NIMBYism.
Well, we also have, in East Palo Alto, we're faced with this very complicated scenario of events where we're at the crux of having a redevelopment influx of the community. But the existing staff, which is really modest in numbers, is focused on this issue of RVs and on all these other topics that we've been discussing. So we can't do them both at once well. So we are focusing on dealing with the RV situation, and that is at a detriment to the development, which would help to provide these additional amenities to the community and additional housing, even, because as the developers develop, they're going to have to pay into the housing program.
Let's talk about why the focus has to be on the RVs and not on the development.
Yeah, and that's because...
And I know, I think the last I heard, Palo Alto, to give a comparison, has a city staff of about 1,000, and East Palo Alto has a city staff of about, what, a little less than 100?
A little over 100, yeah.
A little over 100.
Right.
So why does the focus have to be on the RVs now?
Well, for us in East Palo Alto, we're experiencing a number of health and safety issues related to the RVs. Because East Palo Alto is only 2.5 square miles, if you have an RV in East Palo Alto, it affects the community, period, wherever you are. And you know, there's a density, there's people, you know, disposing of things in the public right of way, and it directly impacts the residents in East Palo Alto. So that's become a quality of life issue for residents.
You have some things on the drawing board in terms of RV, okay, if you could.
Yes, our goal is to establish a safe parking initiative, partnered with the city, partnered with other service providers. And it's using a city piece of land where the city has hired an architect, and we will staff it, we will run it. We looked at what the best practices are around the country, And East Palo Alto has its own unique way of doing things. And so we know that in order to implement something like this, we had to hear from those that are the RV dwellers, and we had to hear from the city, and we had to hear from other service providers on what would be the best mix of best practices for this community. And so we hope to have this safe parking initiative up and running within the next 60 to 90 days. I know some are saying next month, but if we can happen next month, I'll be happier than a camper. But we need to.
And not one living near recreational vehicles, right? Oh, well.
Wow, that was good. That was good.
I
so,
don't know.
so that's our goal, and the community can help us. We look for people. We ask people to give of their time, their talent, and their treasure. So if you're skilled out there in the world and you want to help people do resume writing or things of that nature, we could use you. If you want to come and volunteer, if you want to cook meals or things of that nature, we can use you.
And that would be what, to projectwehope.org?
ProjectWeHope.org. You can go on our website. You can go to info. You can send an email to info@projectwehope.org or city.com.
Or to be P. Bains?
Or pbains7@projectwehope.com, though.
And the telephone number?
650-330-8000.
So we're ending on a hopeful picture that there are things being done?
Yes,
Oh, yes.
absolutely.
Oh,
and,
yes.
and Pastor Bains is an incredible assistance to the whole community in so many ways with regards to homeless and addressing all of these very complicated issues. It's like a ball of nuts, and he just keeps untangling each knot one by one.
Ah! And so you say, what, 60 to 90 days will be?
Yes, we hope to have that up and running, and it's going to be a pilot program for 1 year thanks to the partnership with the city of East Palo Alto. They are investing their land as well as their resources as well as some funding, but we need about $100,000 to come in to help us do this program in addition to the funding that the city is putting in.
So we are witnessing some changes. It's said that challenges give rise to opportunities, or challenges are just opportunities. So we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about some of the opportunities, and so we'll be soon seeing some of the results.
Yes, yes we will. We're stronger together than we are apart.
And we're looking forward to those changes happening here.
That might bring new regulations? Or an ease in regulations?
Well, there's no way you can ease regulations in terms of the issues that we're addressing from the RVs specifically, but I think that we're looking at what can we do so that it's sustainable.
Okay, what can we do so that it's sustainable? We'll be watching to see what will be done. And I thank you so much for sharing. I would like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time.